Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Embodying the Logos. Today, I'm joined by Luke, and we're gonna do an exploration about relationships. Like, what does it mean to be in relation? Like, what are the options within a relation? And we're we were just talking about the angles from which you can approach that. And like Luke and I have a different style, so that might actually contribute or
Yeah,
detract from the conversation. So we'll
probably a
find
little of
that
both.
out. So yeah, Luke, like what is a relation?
Um, okay, well, what's interesting is you, before we started, you said you like to start out with definitions, and like one of my shticks is that no one understands anything through definitions. But I love it. I'm willing to roll with this. The way I would say it, I don't know that I can give a clear, succinct definition. It takes me a while to work there, but I see relationships as I think one of the best ways to understand them is they are fields of um, seeming opposites, uh, somewhat. I almost think of them as like a Venn diagram. I often think that what relationships are these different fields of varying degrees of overlapping patterns, and so a relationship like your and I relationship, to make it more practical and simple, would be definitely centered around this little corner, centered around Paul. I'm trying to think. First times I probably interacted with you were Bridges of Meaning. I don't know that I interacted with you before Bridges of Meaning.
Oh,
And then, everybody gets different little spheres in which they participate, the corners of the corners. And so we have a relationship is any degree of, let's see, time, energy, attention spent engaging and participating in some common love would maybe be the broadest way to define a relationship.
right. So a couple of things stood out to me, right? So you were talking about that it's centered around something, right? Um, so I responded to you in a YouTube comment, right? Like that the centering around something is what allows gives meaning to the love, right? So so there that's what unifies uh, and gives shared experience, right? Like so I agree with the centering and the center can change, right? Like it doesn't have to be one center. Um, because I can play tennis with you and I can have a conversation and like they're not centered around the same uh, thing unless we do both of these things in service to something higher, right? But that's kind of a cheat there.
Right. Well, like in a friendship, there's many different subspecies of ways that you can participate and interact, and then there's probably a common center to all those different subspecies, which
Well,
would be the
hopefully,
highest thing.
if you're an integrated person,
Yeah.
that is true. But like, there's I think plenty of people that don't have that.
Yeah. No, I do think that's some degree of integration, because um, because truly, I guess from my perspective, that would be actually loving the person of which all the subspecies are participating in, rather than using the person in some kind of uh, transactional way. Like I'm
Hmm.
using you for, I don't know. I think of, I had a friend. He became a friend, but when I was really young, Nintendo had just come out, right?
Yeah.
And my family would not let us get a Nintendo for the longest time, but I had a friend who had a Nintendo, and so we became friends because I wanted to go to his house and play Nintendo all the time. But that was a very I think we became friends throughout the entirety of our relationship, but that's an example of at least to a pretty significant degree transactional thing. Like I wanted to play his Nintendo, right?
Hmm. Does that make it lesser or like? Cause,
Well, so so the way that I would understand even that though is, I don't know. I was talking about this recently. I think in any interaction that we have with another person, there are areas of overlap and connection and unity in this interaction, and there are levels of disunity and disharmony, order and chaos, or whatever. And it depends on whatever you want to focus on in that particular interaction. Will really, I'm not saying it's going to dictate, but it will highly influence um, how both people experience that interaction. So, like for
hmm.
example, like you, I tend to be a lot more disagreeable with people where I have a lot more commonality.
Hmm.
Like if we have a ton of overlap, I'll tend to probably lean into the disagreement or the disunity or the distinctions between us rather than all the things we have in common. Because I'm just like, well, we don't
Because
need to.
there's something that can hold the tension.
Yeah, for sure. And to me, I'm like, we don't need to work on that. We already agree. Like, I don't think we need to go around patting each other on the back about stuff that we agree on. Like, let's work on the stuff that's
The
um,
contrast.
yes. Whereas, like, because so like a perfect example in this little corner to even make it more practical would be like I think I've always gotten along relatively well with you and Mark, but you and Mark are very the way that we discuss and the way that we approach things and the way that we think about stuff tends to be pretty different. But
Hmm.
I know I know I would say know is the right word. I know and I have faith that there is common unity in us that you have that I have. I mean, I believe that fundamentally because I don't believe in because I believe human beings are good. I believe we're made in the image of God. You know,
Being is good,
huh?
and like I would say, being is good, and human beings participate in being, so they inherit the goodness of being, and
Yes.
they can choose not to. Like that's the problem.
Yes, they can choose not to, but I have a faith that in any person, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that anyone that I can relate to, anyone who has being, anyone who's participating in being,
Hmm.
has something that you can connect to if you have eyes to see, no matter where they're at, no matter how far gone or whatever judgment you want to make of them, of how twisted they've gotten that being. There's unity there to be had, to be agaped into existence, to lean into, to love. And so the further
Hmm.
that someone is from me, I almost take it as like a
Challenge.
personal challenge. Yeah, I'm just like, we're gonna like we'll connect. And and I have a pretty radical faith that that can happen. And I think it's um I don't know, it gets at pretty fundamental assumptions in the way that I see things because it's, these little Lukeisms I like to quote all the time, but it's Lewis, what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are. You can interact with someone who's very different from you and be the kind of person and be standing in the kind of place where, let's say, your enemy is your friend. Like where there are no more enemies, where you can actually love your enemy because you are endlessly opening to give of yourself to bridge the gap, to mediate the difference, I guess is the way that I would say it.
Hmm.
Rather than needing to, and this gets into like validation, like what you and Mark were talking about the other day, rather than this libidinal need to constantly need, and I like a lot of affirmation. So like this is I do like it, but like I don't um
You're doing well, Luke.
well, thank you. I don't it almost seems to me to be you're not a very integrated person if you need the kind of security of having tons of people around you that affirm your self identity all the time.
Mhm. I would distinguish there between validation, right? Because validation is a statement of truth,
Mm,
and affirmation, which is like a reinforcement of an emotional state more so, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I want to challenge you a little bit because
Okay.
the word that came up for me is hypocrisy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, so let's just state that yes, because we're both part of reality, right? Like, there's always something that is shared and that can be appealed to, right? Like, I don't want to challenge that
Yeah.
axiom necessarily, right? But then the the question at a certain point is, right, like it's the elephant in the room, right? Like at a certain point you're ignoring the elephant in the room, and at, that turns into hypocrisy. Would you agree with that?
So what's the elephant that you're ignoring that then becomes
Well, the
hypocrisy?
disagreement, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to. I don't think that it's necessarily ignoring it. Like that would be hypocrisy, I think. If there's something uh, so what would be the I may be misunderstanding you, but what would be the difference between hypocrisy and self-control? Because there may be something that keeps coming up in my consciousness that I'm observing,
mhm,
whether it's that I'm focusing on, whether it's the disagreement, and then you may ignore that. That could be self-discipline,
right?
or it could be hypocrisy.
Yeah, but there's a distinction between you relating to yourself, right? Because I might ignore things in this conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's me relating to you,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So the reason why I use the example elephant in the room is because it's significant, right? Like the elephant is salient, it's
Mhm.
significant, right? And then when when you don't recognize the elephant, right? Then you're in some sense not in reality, right? Like you're tolerating the ignoring of existence.
Um, so so I guess what I'm well, this I don't know. I would say that this gets at discernment because there may be depending on both the personal slash individual. I'm meaning just like the the person, which is never by themselves. That's always a hard distinction to make. I try to be careful in my language between person and individual because uh then
Hmm.
whatever. I don't want to go down that road, but
Well, this is important. I agree.
it is important. But the so a person may notice something and see something and be focused on something, which may or may not be legitimate. Like it could be their own weakness or disintegration of why they're focused on that thing. So there's that component of it where the person is
Well,
doing,
I think focus actually necessarily has that component, right?
yeah.
Because you focus on something because you need to deal with it, right? Which means that there's an insufficiency, a lack, a problem, like un, unless you worship or like
Yes,
unless
but
you
you could be
venerate it,
disintegrated in a way where let's say like you're a hypochondriac or something. You could be hyper focused on something that's an illusion
right?
or that you should not be focused on.
Yes, that's most people.
Right. And so and there are and there's the personal component of it and then there's like cultural components of it because I think
Hmm.
like just take America where I am, there are people that I would say both at the personal level and then at the collective group level that are very focused on things that I think are distracting them from their actual problems,
Hmm.
and exacerbating their own problems probably. And so I am all I'm trying to say is that in any interaction with a person where there are again there's agreement and disagreement, there's unity and there's distinction, there's commonality and then there's things that are different. Which of those you focus on and why is not is not necessarily something that I think can be formalized and prescribed.
No, that's a consequence of value, right? And what you value is in some sense informed by what you deem possible.
Yeah, it's also a consequence of love and maturity. I mean, it's kind of like there's this artist that I really like who his name's Noah Gunderson, and he's coming to town. And so he had this lyric though I was listening to because I'm trying to just listen to a lot of his music before he shows up, and he has this line in it that's something like, "If I'd have told you then what you could have been, would you even would you have essentially like would you have listened?"
Hmm.
And it's this, and it's very similar to a lot of these little pithy statements that I love all the time, like you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink, or what you see and hear. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I think a lot of that is like you can. This is where I think wisdom comes in, and love and holiness. The whole like fruit of the spirit from Galatians 5. I was just looking at this morning because it's in Paul's Twitter tagline. Equipping people for things against which there is no law. The fruit of the spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those things, which are somewhat generic, transcendental things, they are transcendent and immanent 'cause they're real things. It's like love. It's something that we all know and experience, and you can point to particulars of it, but it's also bigger than any of those particulars can reduce. So like when you are interacting with someone, all that fruit of the spirit stuff is going to be um it's going to be bridging the gap for anyone who's participating in being in a way where, because here's the thing, you can sit there. My concern, this is my concern. I'm circling around this thing, is that someone can be so hyper focused on a mode of disagreement, and it's kind of like the person you're interacting with is incapable of seeing the thing that you're trying to point out. So even if
Hmm.
you're right, it doesn't matter.
Right, I agree.
Which is the whole, like, you can be, that's why I say you can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right.
Yeah, pearls
It
before
doesn't
swine.
necessarily matter.
Yeah, pearls before swine. That's that, right? And then they turn
Yes,
around and trample you. Like, yeah.
yes, but then there's also the problem of this is the thing, is most people think the thing that they're saying is right, and they resort to the pearls before swine. Most people don't have the humility and the impulse to think, maybe I'm the swine.
Um, yeah, but that would be on a different level then, or like,
What do you mean different level?
well, okay, like I would call that a different dimensionality, right? Because we're always the swine, right? Like in some way,
Yeah.
but there's ways, right? Like for example, if I set the frame and I say 1 + 1 is equals 2, and you can't agree with me, that's one way of being a swine, right? Like when I say abortion is wrong and you can't agree with me, that's a different way of being a swine because now there's like way more involved, right? Like it it's complex, and it's contingent upon a bunch of assumptions and spirits that you're in, right? And you're not, maybe not aware of, right? So that type of swinery, right, is um, you have a different type of responsibility towards that. I would argue that.
Yeah, I don't, so I mean, I would kind of like you to help me think through this. So I would categorize it as a conflict the other day with someone where, and it was kind of on this point more or less, and it's one of those things that doesn't have resolution. I hate conflict that doesn't have some healthy resolution where it's like I feel like we're moving in the right direction. Like conflict that just gets dropped and then just waits to resurface later, where I don't feel like anything's being done, like both in
That's
my,
an elephant in the room, by the way.
well,
Yes.
right, and I hate it, like, whether it's in my own family, my family of origin, any of my friendships, like, it drives me crazy. I mean, almost quite literally, because I'm a highly emotional, type person, and so like I can't compartmentalize that in silence, so it just like sits with me. So I had this conflict with a person, and it was over this topic because it was which is probably apropos and good that we're having this conversation because when you disagree with someone, when you see things differently, when communion breaks down, what I often see this in my own conflict, and I try not to do this, but even more broadly, is that exact dynamic happens where this person sees it this way, this person sees it this way. Maybe people are speaking past each other, maybe they're not.
But you have division, right?
Huh?
You have division. So
Yeah,
instead of one vision, right? Because that's what communion is, right?
yeah,
You organize around one vision, you get division. So you get
hmm,
now two visions, hopefully still on the same thing.
yes,
And so what you need to do is you need to reintegrate how these two visions are part of the same reality, right?
yeah,
Because if there is division and you can't reintegrate them, you're not looking at the same thing.
yeah. I mean, yes, and right, I see your point. But so so at the point where you realize maybe either subconsciously or consciously, because like that's something you're aware of and you can articulate that. So you maybe become consciously aware of that in some disagreement, and maybe the other person is or is not. Then, then I feel like then is the next moment where it goes into either probably what I would call a posture of openness and humility, or the posture of what I often call the exclusivist religion of the right side of history. Is I think there can be a tendency for people to say we're looking at the wrong thing, and then and you it's more so you're looking at the wrong thing. You're misunderstanding this correctly. You're not looking at this correctly, and I am, and it's wanting to colonize the other person and get them into your mode of thinking, the right mode of thinking.
Well, can we separate those two, right? Because
Okay.
like, can we first get agreement whether that's actually true or not? That someone can be on the right side of history?
Well, I I so I would say in a static way, like somebody because of what I said earlier, like you can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right. This is like almost the Vervaekean adverbial versus
No, no,
adjective.
I'm just
Okay.
trying to limit it to the local space, right? Because there's your position, right, or your observation, and then there's what you do with it,
Yeah.
right? And like I want to have those two separate, right? Because like I think you can be on the right side of history with your judgment, right? But you're not the jury and the execution of that judgment, right? So if we're talking about humility or whatever, right? Like you're allowed to make the judgment, and like I would even say that you're obliged to make the judgment because that's giving discernment to other people, right? But then when you've made the judgment, like what are the implications of that? That's a whole different discussion, right? And now we get into law, right? Because that's what law is supposed to deal with, right? Like okay, like we're gonna punish people who speed on the highway. It's like
Yeah.
okay, like maybe, but
Well, so
also that's not interesting to me, right? Like
no.
like it's interesting to me whether you can say that it's bad that people do that, right? Like whether that's actually a judgment that you can make or not.
So tell me if I'm gonna give an example of my own life of what I think you're talking about and tell me if this is what you mean. So, um, so throughout the entirety of my life, um, I've kind of always been a evolving, growing. I mean, this is the way that I would say it: reading, learning, changing in my own relationship to my Christianity. Right. So, like, I haven't been Orthodox my whole life. I'm Orthodox now. I had a period of being Reformed and Calvinist and whatever. So that's always been changing. I've been reading different things, and so throughout a lot of that, my mother is probably the most Uh, well, she's the most interested in thinking and talking about and interacting with about her faith, but throughout a lot of that, I've with so much change and so much discussion, my mother and I have had a lot of conversations and disagreements about this whole journey, my whole journey with this stuff. And something that would always come up with my mom is we when I would say that I was less mature than I am now, hopefully, God willing, and or may that be true. uh, we would get into disagreements, and and we'd have this thing where it'd be like, well, you just think your opinions are correct, and then it's just like the retort is like, well, you just think your opinions are correct, and I'm like, of course. Like that's what you're just saying, making the judgment. Like you have to make the judgment. You have to say
Well,
what you're thinking. Is that what you're talking about?
well, no, because like this puts me back into Plato Book 5 actually, because
Mm,
they're talking about truth, right? And or knowing, right, which would be true, right? Knowledge is true, right? And the truth of the knowledge is as a consequence of that it accords to being, right? So if I'm in accordance with being, I get a participatory knowledge of what it's like to be like that, right? Whatever that means, right? Because I can't put words on that, like it's not
mhm.
articulatable, right? But that's I inherit the authority of being, right? Through being true to it, right? Like I'm in a faithful relationship to being, and now I can say something that's real, right? Like I can use that authority to make statements in the world, right? And then there's the realm of opinion, right? And the realm of opinion isn't in relationship to being, right? Like opinion is in relationship to impressions, right? Like if you would put it in the cave analogy, right? Like you have an opinion about the shadows on the wall, right? But the shadows on the wall are not reality, right? They're images of what is real. So there's a distinction between opinions, right? Like when you do something, right, and it upsets me, right? I have a negative opinion about what you did, but that doesn't make it bad or evil or anything. That just makes it that I'm affected in a negative way. So I'm
You're just saying opinion is just like I don't like that.
yes, effectively. It's a aesthetic judgment.
So I suppose where I would maybe differ in that framing would be um I think the only place where we get this truth where you are in accord with being that differs from opinion that is universally applicable to all people would be in uh, the
True
highest way
revelation.
the high well yeah but the highest way to say that would be love, and then down to the fruit of the spirit against which things there is no law. The problem, the difficulty I often have is like you can't then wield that truth to someone else and tell them what that means for them and how they need to live,
Um,
because then it
yeah,
becomes
yeah.
this
Well, like
colonizing thing that's power and no longer authority.
I I agree that you can't wield it as a tool, but you can wield it as a shield or whatever, or as a mirror, or like
Or
you
you can
can
say you can say what you think, and then it would be like a mirror,
no,
I suppose.
no,
No.
no, like there's a this no, like what do you think Jesus did?
Um, I think Jesus.
Jesus couldn't save the people from his town, right? And why couldn't he save them? Not because he didn't have the authority or whatever, right? Like because he had, right? Because he been granted the authority. But the reason that he couldn't save them is because they didn't believe. And why didn't they believe? Because they saw the kid that they grew up with. They didn't see him as the Son of God. They saw him as what their historical interpretation of him, and so he couldn't get into right relationship, right? So they couldn't cooperate with him, right? They couldn't have a faithful relationship, right? So then they couldn't inherit his authority, right? Like he couldn't affect them because they wouldn't let him. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have the authority, and like he should not have spoken there. Like he still should have spoken. He still should have given them the chance to redeem themselves effectively, right? To get in right relationship with truth and being alive, right? And and that they chose to look another way for whatever reason that they made up in their head.
Yeah. Well, and I think Jesus though too was like I mean, he was being I mean, I assume he's being fairly selective or discerning of when he speaks, when he doesn't speak, what he says, and how he
Yeah,
says
because he
it.
can see people's hearts, right?
Yes.
So he has perfect awareness in how to affect people, and he
And so,
couldn't, right?
yeah, I
So
mean,
like,
so that's kind of the problem. Or I mean, that's the difficulty I think that it is as a, at least for me, is somewhat, and this is why I like to talk about honesty a lot. I mean, at least for me, within myself, is I I am, and this is kind of back to the disagreement that I had with the person the other time, is very, I'm very often a person that's full of self doubt. And so, like, if I have a disagreement with someone about something, I do have my, I don't know what you'd say about that. I have my thoughts about the truth that I see. And then, but uh, I'm also very aware that I may be deluded and the other person may be right, because I mean that's happened in my life. I've
mhm.
had lots of conviction about certain topics and thought that I was standing on the side of truth and proper authority, and that hasn't been the case. And very often I can interact with people. I mean, I would say our culture is broadly people who are not very open to that side of the thing. You know,
I
they're
I
not
I
very.
I agree, but like I wanna get a couple things straight, right? So if you have a drug user and they're like, I'm gonna shoot up some drugs right now, like you have the obligation to say like don't do that. That's not good, right? Like you don't have the obligation to physically restrain them and prevent them from doing it. Like, but you need to provide them with the chance for redemption, right? Like you saying that the first like the 100th time that you say that, like it might actually land, right? Like there might actually at that day, for whatever miraculous reason, be the soil that that seed get lands.
Yes. Now, to push back a little bit and to make it very practical, like with my own children, very often I'm at the place, at least in my parenting, my kids are, teenage years, basically early teens, early mid-teens, and and very often what I find with my wife and our interactions with them is, I think as parents, we have probably been prone to, uh, and especially, I mean, you see these generational differences. We've been prone to probably lean into talking a lot with our kids through all this and understanding things and having discussions with our kids. Where we often are with our kids and in conversations is we get into, I've noticed that we have cultivated and fostered children who like to argue a lot.
Yep. Because you
Um,
give them the option, right?
True, but part of that I think is the medium that we have cultivated has been talking about things a lot, and so where I'm kind of moving in my parenting is, uh, I often have the impulse to say something because that was the way that I was raised, either in a, you know, like I mean, it's not like the kids are drug addicts, but, like, let's say they're wanting to watch screens and wanting to justify it, or wanting to
They're
eat a
little
bunch,
rebels. That's
or
what they
right,
are.
or wanting to eat a bunch of crap they shouldn't eat, and I come in to right, to be like, "Don't shoot up that black tar heroin, son,"
Yes. Lay down the law.
you
Yes.
know? However, like, he knows what I think. I don't need to tell him what I think. I've told him
No, you do.
this is why, like, I've told you a
No,
thousand
I
times.
think you do. Like,
But here's where I would say as a parent, I think sometimes you can be damned if you do and damned if you don't. Sometimes I think you're gonna create a bigger problem with your verbal intervention than if you didn't say anything.
right. I agree that that potential is there. And actually, Van der Clay pointed it out to me, right? Like, um, but ends up in fatalism because now, right? Like, and I'm not saying that you can never make that discernment, right? Like, there's definitely cases where like you should just hold your mouth, right? So when there's high emotions, right? Like piling up that one, like the straw that breaks the camel's back, bad. Like
Yeah.
don't break the camel's back, right? So I
A
agree.
lot of proverbs about that actually. Keeping your mouth closed.
So there is wisdom in what you say, right? But there's also how you say it, right?
Mhm.
Um, like when you say something from a place of authority, right? Like I the way I think of it is that there's a bunch of affordances within the other person, right? So there's hooks that you can hook into and make an appeal to them, right? And the most easy hooks are emotional, right? But but when you're doing an emotional appeal, that's like functional, right? So if I do an emotional appeal on you, like, oh, I feel bad because you haven't done the dishes, right? That's not going to change you, right? Like it's not going to teach you how to fish, right? Like it's not going to make you a person that will do the dishes from now on. It will maybe make you the dishes to do the dishes right now, right? So this manipulation, and you're also borrowing from from the relationship, right? Because
Borrowing. Okay.
right, like because there's goodwill on your side, right? And I'm withdrawing from the bank of goodwill, and if I keep doing that, I destroy the relationship, right? Like I can't make that emotional appeal all the time because then it's blackmail, right?
Yeah.
Like it. So that, like, this is why I don't like emotional anything, because like I don't think it leads anywhere good, and it's the tool of the ego, right? Like you said, you can wield it, right? Like it's you get to wield something that isn't yours, and it's like that's necessary sometimes. I agree, but not good. Like it's not good.
So what you're saying is helpful to me in some ways. It's helping me to see some stuff because I think I often have that pattern in my own life with my kids is very often uh I'm a very often I struggle with resentment and resentment to my kids because a lot of it for me, their disobedience bothers me because the way that I often interpret it and see it is that it's a it's an inability on their half or an apathy on their half to care about how their decisions affect me
Right? It's
or
apathy. Yes, I
right,
agree.
or the rest of their
Or
family or whatever.
incapacity. Like I don't, because apathy would be a dulling down of something that's there or something, right? But you can
Yeah.
also say like they never developed it,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
So
and that it varies from person to person, how that, whatever capacities they have for that. But it often is like, I want you part of my struggle, and again, this is almost like what I would what I'm saying is you're helpful because it's making me realize that to some degree, I take I want my kids to care about the way that their decisions affect other people in the same way that I do because I'm this highly emotional person and which the negative side of it tends toward what I've come to understand as codependency. Like, I'm so concerned about how my decisions affect other people that I'm basically codependent. Like, it's hard for me to even know what I think about things often because I don't know how to separate what I think about something
Right,
from what you
and
think
that
about something.
might be the thing that clouds your relationship to the truth, or
Well, I think it,
your
it I think it
your
often.
ability to appeal to it, because it's conflicting with this high value that you have by maintaining the integrity of the relationship. Like, I don't even want to use integrity, but because I think you're confusing integrity of relationship to like purity, right? Um, because integrity is something that relates to the friction and is unaffected by it, right? Like it's structurally sound. While if you need to prostrate yourself in front of the relationship in order to maintain it, like you in some sense don't trust the relationship enough to carry that load.
Well, I think that's true, or I don't, or I very often don't. I don't like going through. I mean, this is very true for me. I don't like going through the pain, especially if I have a history of a pain of challenging someone in a relationship, because if I feel like if they're not going to respond to that in a mature way, seeing that this is a thing that's really motivated by love and that I'm not trying to hurt them. Like, granted, if I'm doing it well, but if they don't respond to that in a healthy way, and if they essentially get angry at me, I like it's a very difficult thing for my kind of personality and my constitution to deal with that, because it it ruins my days and weeks. Like, I can't
I agree.
function very well.
Right, and then there's two things, right? Like Dutch proverb, soft healers make stinking wounds,
Hmm.
right? So if you don't heal that, you end up with a festering wound that, right? You end up with the elephant in the room. And so that's one thing for you to realize, right? But it's also important for the other person to realize, right? So because how do you commune, right? Like why does the relationship um, conflict? Because you're encroaching on their individuality, right? Not on their personhood. You're encroaching on their individuality,
Yes, totally agree with that.
right? And so their conception of the relationship that they're in, right, is misframed, right? So they're not thinking in how the relationship enables them to be, right? They're thinking of the relationship as an imposition, at least under that context, right? So if you can engage the conflict in, okay, like we're aimed at this, and this tension between us is uh, inhibiting our ability to reach that, then we have a shared interest in resolving this, even though it will hurt you.
Yes, theoretically, but I mean, I just think that there are just so few people in the world that are, maybe even capable of getting at the level where they have any degree of ability to understand or even be aware of, like, what you just said.
No, I think everybody does that. I
Everybody
think
what?
I think people
People know
like
it, and people know it, like,
right.
innately, I think,
They
but they
yeah,
can't talk
proceed
about it.
exactly. But the point is, like, if they know it, right, and so this is talking to the platonic knowing, right? So,
Yes.
so they have participated in the being, right? So they have recognition
Yeah.
of that being true,
Yeah,
right?
they have to know it because they have some degree of healthy relationship. So, I mean, they know it somehow. They have to.
Right. So you don't necessarily need to propositionalize this, right?
No.
But you do appeal to the to the being that they know, and that being that they know has an authority within them,
Yes.
right?
So
And
it's like appealing to their true self is the way that I would say that.
yeah, I don't like that at all.
What?
Because it's
Look,
not, no,
whatever.
it's like
Okay,
it's
then
not
just say
them.
what you just
No, no,
said.
but no, but it's important. It's not them, right? Like it's a being that's outside of them that has informed them, right? And it's also informed you, right? So you share this, right? Like it's not an individual thing. Like
No,
it's a shared reality. It's a shared truth.
it's the person, the divine person, the logos,
Yes,
whatever, the
yes, you're
divine
correct.
man.
Yes,
But that man is
yes,
present in everyone because that's the being in which we participate.
yes. But yeah, then what does that mean, right? Like I agree, right? Like that. So that is the truth, right? And that you could use to make an appeal, right? Like that's the shared reality. Like that's the the being that we all participate in. But that doesn't mean that we we are drawn to that, right? Because yeah, people are the best. Like they're so good at finding reasons not to do the right thing and all of that, right? and
Yeah.
and the
I mean,
smarter that you are, the more reasons that you can find. And
yeah,
yeah,
they
so you have to
are and
have
they
people
aren't.
overcome that, right?
Yes.
That's
Yeah, they are and they aren't. And it's a very I don't know, it's a hard thing. It One of the hard questions for my life always is figuring out when and how hard to press in any relationship that you have, right? Because of like what I said before, having the humility to somewhat not not necessarily think that I see everything perfectly because like I'm not a saint. So I'm not like of course I assume I'm right about stuff, but I don't that's why I hold an opinion and that's why I think about things the way that I think about them, but I could be wrong and then what is the wisdom and how hard you try to press that upon someone else? Like somewhat that's the relationship. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. That's the relationship of, I suppose, the masculine, the feminine impulse. Like, do you remember Tyler Anderson? He's not around anymore, but early days of Bridges of Meaning. He was in Paul's local first Jordan Peterson meetup. Like he was really early. Him and Joey. I mean, he was kind of one of the early Bridges of Meaning people. I think Joey mainly did it, but anyhow, he's not around anymore. Um, But, like, if you go to some of the early randos conversations, he's in them. Tyler was awesome, and if you just look back in early Discord days, but, he used to say something like, churches have become or a lot of churches are masculine spaces with feminine language when they should be feminine spaces with masculine language, and, uh,
yeah,
and I think
I
that's
agree.
Huh?
I agree.
Yeah, and I think that's very spot on, and it was very perceptive early on, and I just came back to that the other day, and I was talking to someone about it because that's kind of my that balance is what we're talking about. Like, in the context of the relationship, it needs to be a womb, a welcoming, hospitable space where there's the freedom, because it's freedom and constraint too, right? That's masculine and feminine, where there's the freedom for a person to this is the true part of safe spaces to say what they really think. It's part of the truth of estuaries. People will not say what they think if they think you're going to cut their head off. They won't, or a few people will because they're just people that are zealots, you know. But so there needs to be that. But then we also need to learn how I personally, I'll just say this. I personally really need to learn
Oh,
the
I'm sorry. Like
how to have masculine
I don't know if I agree with that.
with what
That needs to be there.
the the freedom to for people to say what they think?
Yeah.
Um,
Like
well,
like they like they need to, like I don't because what. okay, the objection that I have is that like people are sometimes just wrong, right? And entertaining wrongness is
Mhm.
bad, right?
Mhm.
So I'm I'm not saying that they shouldn't be helped or whatever, right? Like that's not the argument that I'm trying to make,
Yeah.
but
No, I understand.
I
I mean,
don't
I
I
think I
don't think
understand, but don't you think
you need to give a stage for falsehood. Like I think that that's not good.
yeah, but part of that is but, I mean, this gets into, like, the really practical aspects of this little corner and criticisms that you and Mark have had, right? Like, that's your like, that's your mode, though. Like, you're much more you are much more prone and comfortable to, in a very masculine way, just say it like you see it. Call it out. This is what people need, like, and it's much more Ben Shapiro, facts don't care about your feelings. Like, that's much more your mode.
Yeah, but
And that's
right?
fine, and
No,
that's
no,
fine. Here's the thing, is like
but right,
go ahead.
like we're still giving the space. Like
I agree, but people so, like, people are I think you are too, but, like, there are people who will very I know there are a lot of people, and there have been a lot of people who really have, um, responded negatively to that general to
yes,
the spirit of the space that you and Mark present.
because they're looking for validation.
Perhaps, but, like, here's the thing, this is going back to the whole, like, that we are always a combination in any relationship of unities and distinctions, right? So, like, this is where with you, like, what because I've had a lot of conversations with people that are just like want to kick Mark off the server, or like Mark and Manuel are assholes or whatever, and I'm like, no, and I don't like I would never. I'm like, they are, to me. Part of it is I have a relationship with you guys, but also part of it is like, no, I'm just not. I'm not a fan ever, and part of that's just me of getting rid of anyone. Like, I never wanna make that move. I'm just like, you don't get to I don't think that people I don't think you're, like, calling for the banning of anyone. Maybe you would, I don't know, just a different kind of people.
I would no, I would call for people ban of people, right? And what is the type of people that I call for the ban of is whether they're in good faith or bad faith, right? Like if you're in bad faith, right, which means that you're not pointing up, right? So you're not looking for cooperation. Like if you don't want to cooperate, you shouldn't participate. Like
Right.
there's no space for people who don't want to cooperate. And like
But what happens when you see someone, or you're having an interaction with someone where you're like, "This person isn't cooperating," and then they say, "No, you're not cooperating."
well, that's what they're always going to do. That's
Right,
that's that's all the trouble that I always walk into, right?
but then
And
what happens? How does that resolve?
well, that means that well, it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't resolve because we can't cooperate. Like
My
like
my
that's already established, right? Like like we can just say yes, no,
Yes.
right? Like but but it's like I know whether you're in good faith or not, right? Because I can state an aim, right? If I get agreement on the aim, and now you're doing things that don't work towards the aim, you're sabotaging. Like whether that's intentional or not is not relevant.
Yes. Oh, I agree. Intentionality is not completely irrelevant, but almost close. I don't like to pay a lot of attention to that. I
Like
guess.
like like I we were like I and Mark were talking to someone on the awakening from the meaning crisis Discord, and he at a certain point he was saying, "Well, I challenge your statement because I think that's the right thing to do."
Hmm. Which I'm sure
And
is something you can get behind.
well, let's just follow it up, right?
Yeah.
And then we asked, well, what about your own statement? Like, do you challenge those? And it was no. And I'm like, you're holding two standards in the conversation, like, like, why aren't the things that you say undergoing the same scrutiny that as the things that we say? Like, that's not fair. and you can't you like and then there's this other thing, right? Like what he's doing, and he admitted to this, right? He's looking for ways to challenge, right? Not because what we say is wrong, but because that's what he wants to do. And I don't challenge based upon wanting to challenge. I challenge because I see something that's wrong, right? Like I might be wrong in my observation, right? But like that's something I can't avoid.
Yeah.
But
Well,
you,
no,
you,
no
you
one
see
can.
that how this attitude is just makes cooperation impossible. Like we were like, okay, like you're in bad faith. Like someone that is acting in that manner and is just feels justified in doing that. Like I can't cooperate with you. Like I won't. And like there's a bunch of other ways, right? Like we've kind of identified like all these means where people are just incapable of cooperating, right? And like it's all a consequence of this individualism, right? This individualism is disconnecting, right? Like it's disallowing the intimacy within the relationship, and so they can't share a frame of reference with you.
Well, I think that's yeah, that's another way to say that I think is it's just a lack of love. It's a lack of
Yes.
self-sacrifice. It's a
Yeah.
lack of willingness to reorient, see things differently, be open.
Die to be born in the idea that is in conflict with your worldview, because that's literally what these people need to do, right? And like I get why people don't like me and Mark, because we're basically saying you're gonna have to die. I was like, yeah, like that that sucks when people say that to you, right? But like you want to go to that place, the way that you're moving isn't going to get you there. You're going to have to die, and you're going to have to reborn in a different worldview, right? Like your spirituality has to change, right? Like just and and that's the only way that you'll get there.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
don't.
just not
I
a
mean,
nice message.
part of it. Tell me what you think of this. Part of it could be because I know for myself, it's not. It's not so much that I'm opposed to that. I mean, to me, that's just a very Christian idea. Not well, not even Christian. To me, that's the way reality coheres. Sacrifice. Like you got to die. I mean, it's unless a seed goes in the ground, it doesn't bear much fruit. Like that's just part of it. I mean, that's part of the natural pattern of reality.
Yeah, but not for them.
Huh?
Not for them.
Well, part of it is like so this would go back to spaces. So I would say I am completely open to that idea, but something that often opens me up to what you would say is the is probably aspects of like confession and humility. If you lead with example of like where you have done your own self death or like where you are self dying, like if you lead with that kind of mimetic example, I think very often that can lead other people because and sometimes you and Mark can come across as very like we have this all figured out and let me just didactically let everybody else know how this all works, and if you just follow the things that we're telling you, like wonderful utopia. And if you just don't follow the things we're telling us, it's because you don't want to die. It becomes this very like totalizing, tautological, uh, somewhat, if I may say, condescending way of approaching it.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And I think, and when that's the mode, you're not gonna get, especially someone who's immature. You're not like if someone has ears to hear, they're gonna have the humility to hear truth wherever it is, right? I mean, they should. But if they're not, like they need to be because somewhat like I don't want to sit around picking and choosing and pointing out names of like who is more immature and childlike or whatever. But like with my own kids, like there's certain things like I just can't sit here from on high and tell them just like these straight propositional truths for them and laws for them to cohere their life to because
But
they're
but
just
but
not going to do that.
but okay. But I'm okay. So like this is a method of conversation, right? Because I think what you're doing is only telling half of the story, right?
Me?
And
When? Like,
well, the description about me and Mark, right?
I don't think
Because
it's always like that.
no, but like let me
Yeah.
expand it, right?
Okay.
So what I do, right, just at the beginning of the conversation, right? I establish a frame, right? A way of looking at reality. And in order for you to cooperate with me, either you need to accept that frame or you need to provide a frame in which I can cooperate with you, right? Like that's the two options.
Right. And I don't even necessarily disagree with that. And I actually think that that's very I think I think you guys and what you just said is a very succinct way and a very simple way to talk about how people interact through discourse. I think that's true. I think what you just said is true. However, due to either in uh, inability, incapacity, a lack of, because also people to even hear what you just said and recognize the validity of it involves relationality. Like they would have to live within the kind of pattern to even recognize what you're saying. You know,
Yeah,
it
but that's why I usually don't state it. But I like I do state like this is the way these things are, right? And like I ask for agreement, right?
right.
And if there's disagreement, then we can figure out like where's the rub, right? So
I guess what I'm trying to say, I agree with you. I guess what I'm trying to say is
that's all
sometimes just
cooperative, right? Like I just want to point this out. Like all of this
it's
is
very
is
cooperative.
is is
Yeah.
highly cooperative. And then when there gets a frustration there, right? That's because they rebel for whatever reason, right? Like
This is where I'd maybe push back on you a little bit with the whole self-death thing. Because what you're maybe doing is essentially relationally speaking Chinese to someone who doesn't speak Chinese and saying like you just need to speak
okay,
Chinese, and if you don't speak Chinese, you're just not willing to die, when maybe what you're called to do is to die and stop speaking
okay, then
Chinese.
okay. Like I'm. Let's explore this. So what does that mean?
Uh what I would say is that what you're maybe doing is being right but being wrong in my own vernacular.
Okay, I'll grant you that. Okay, so what? Like what's the implication?
You mean what should we then do? Or what
Well,
should
yeah,
you then
like
do
you
theoretically?
like this is my objection with all the
Yes.
people that have criticism, right? Like
Yeah.
like it's not relevant whether the criticism is right or wrong because you're not providing a means to resolve it.
Yeah.
So it's like
Um,
okay, like I grant you your criticism is right, then provide me the path, right? And like as long as you can't say, well, this is the path you should follow, like I'm just gonna have to assume that you're wrong or it's impossible.
so I think what I have often found, it's really the thing that I'm talking about as far as like giving an all what you're saying is true. Like anybody can criticize, right? Then give an alternate proposal. Like that's what's hard to do. The problem is in the kind of things that we're talking about, the illustration that we just had, and when it's like maybe the call is for me to die, what that is kind of this ineffable thing, because to me what we're essentially talking about is metanoia, it's repentance. So like when I realize that I'm actually wrong and I need to repent and I need to die, it's like this, I don't know how to distill that into something that I can communicate that's
Yeah, but what's
outside of
wrong by what
metanoia.
standard?
Huh?
Like how do I get the discernment about whether I'm wrong or not?
I mean, that's that kind of magic thing. That's where like your world turns upside down. Uh
Yeah, I get it, right? Like, but like the way that my world flips is if I value something else, right? So like and like this is my criticism towards all the people that have criticism. Like you just
yeah.
value relationship over truth. Like that's effectively
Well, but even that, I think for the people that tend to be team winsome or whatever, like that's a false dichotomy. Like you can't, it's like freedom of constraint or anything. You actually can't value relationship if you don't value truth. And you can't value
I
truth if you
agree,
don't
right?
value
That's why I
relationship.
think it's hypocritical. But
It
but
it can be like this is so ultimately almost in the end of the day what I feel like a lot of it is it's just people disagreeing over temperament. It's like
I
a
agree.
conservative and a liberal impulse or something
I agree.
at the end of the
But
day,
no, it's different. It's like it's the masculine and the feminine,
or that,
right?
yeah,
But what's the feminine? The feminine takes care of the babies,
yeah. Well,
right? So the feminine is a protective, nurturing impulse, right? But
yes,
but if we're talking about being condescending, like if you engage someone with the feminine impulse, that is way more condescending than I'll ever be because I am
it
approaching
can be.
people.
Yes, I agree. It can be very condescending. Which honestly, like, have you ever heard of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People? It's like a
No, I don't
you
read
know, it's a
books.
really famous American book, but it's actually really good. And trying to blanking on the name of the guy. It's old. It was written in the early 1900s. And
so,
I'm
so, 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 yeah, like, yeah, make your point now.
okay. So, but I'm just trying to give a personal anecdote with that because I always used to be. I mean, throughout the course of my life, I would say I'm very not exactly in the same way that you and Mark do, but like I'm very inclined to tell people what I think and to challenge them on
Hmm.
different things. And I used to have this friend, my buddy Ao, shout out Ao, who would always say he would advocate essentially that like because the second chapter of the book is something like that starts off and says one sentence and then it repeats it and it's basically like no one you will not get anyone to do what you want them to do until they want to do what you want them to do, and it's basically like unless they want to listen to you they're not
Yeah,
going to
but I
listen.
think that's already bad framing. Like I listen to that and I'm like, no. Like I don't want people to do anything, right? Like I want people to cooperate. Like they get to decide how to do that. Like
Mm,
this is again, it's the same thing with the leading. It's like, oh, Manuel and Mark want to lead this little corner. Like, no, like I don't give a shit what happens as long as it happens. Like you get to decide how to do the thing as long as you're doing the thing and you're not doing the thing. And my objection is not how you self actualize. My objection is that you're not doing it, right? So like there's a distinction there. Like I don't like this is I judge, right? Like I judge what's going on is wrong. I'm not judging what is right, right? Like I'm not saying like this has to happen this way, like because I don't care. And this is where like we're leaving the space for these people, right? Like 'cause when you're thinking in affordances, right? Like yes, people can't learn unless they have an affordance to grasp what is being presented. So like you need to package whatever you're delivering in a manner that they can interact with, right? So you have to
agreed, but for
reframe
some
and
people
you hmm?
agreed, but for some people that has to be less explicit and more feminine for them to be able to hear the package that you're presenting.
Yeah, well, okay. So to go back, right? So basically, what we're talking about is people who got stuck in a certain developmental stage, right? Like some people get stuck in a developmental stage of a 3-year-old, right? And they just never get out of that. Some people get stuck in a 5, 8, 10-year-old understanding of certain things, right? And so when you're saying if you approach a 3-year-old as a 10-year-old, that's wrong, right? And that's morally wrong even, right? Like that you shouldn't do that, right? And I think that's the judgment that I and Mark are facing, right? Like you're engaging um, with 3-year-olds as 10-year-olds, and I'm like, well, like first of all, I don't know that they're 3-year-olds until I treat them as 10-year-olds and they can't participate, right? So that's one thing. Like they first have to run into the wall to know that the wall is there because I can't magic that wall
Yeah.
without them running into it. And then secondly is like, okay, and then what? Right? Like, do I want to spend my time with a 3-year-old? Like, is that actually a thing that I want to do? Because I don't. Like I don't want to mommy an adult. Like
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. It's a hard I'm probably gonna get going here because I need to do some other things, but this will be interesting. I'd like to know. I'll be interested to know how people respond to it and what you think about it afterwards, and where we could go from here. Because um, this it gets into the problem of, well, what came to mind. It's not even a problem, I guess. Is just self curation, which is
Mhm.
somewhat inevitable, right? Because I often think that, like, there's particular people, like my buddy Cal said once, and Sam Adams has said this many times, but one of the blessings and dangers of this little corner is it's heavily curated with people who like to have a lot of the conversations I like to have. Like what we just talked about. Like, I mean, there's like there's basically nobody in my embodied real life where I live that I can have a conversation like that with. Um, and it's very appealing to me. I mean, most people in my real life just, I mean, it's not like I'm unliked, but they're just kind of like Luke's crazy.
Oh, but you are. So
but
like
that's not unlike this little corner, I guess. And so, um, to your point of like not wanting to hang out with 3-year-olds, yes, like there is. I suppose it's like a center and periphery thing that everything has and a person has. You know, the conversations I like to have, there's a center. There's certain things that I, but then again, like certain things that I like, that I prefer. But you need to not harvest the fringe. You need to not harvest the 3-year-olds or the whatever year olds, or the people that are more masculine in the way that they approach talking about things, or the people that are more feminine. Like we need to keep all those people in there because that's often my pushback to people. I always feel like an outsider, Manuel, obviously, really, in everything. Because like I will critique. This is the thing. I try to balance these things that we're talking about really well in my own person. So, like, I will critique you and Manuel, and I have before, of the way that conversations have been carried on. But then when people on the other side are just like, we need to get rid of them, or they shouldn't do this, or want to bring in some kind of systemic exclusion of you guys, I'm just like, no. Like, I,
Mhm,
I feel like I'm, I'm just like, I'm not game for that either. So
mhm.
I'm just like, I'm not, I don't know. And at the same time, like, Joey has banned people, and he thinks like I'm,
A
weak
wussy.
wussy, yeah, essentially, who just doesn't wanna get rid of anyone, and that's probably true. He's like, it's if I ran Bridges of Meaning or any community, which I don't want to, um,
Well, but that
no
might
one would be
actually
excluded.
be the signal, right? Like
Hmm?
you don't want to because you don't think you're the right person in the job. So like in some sense you're disagreeing with.
I mean, I would run it. I mean, this is why I like Paul, and this is probably, I mean, to any degree that I participate in the little corner outside of the particular relationships that I've developed, because I
Mhm,
mean, I have my own inner ring, my own little corner, the corner of people that I know and have known for years more intimately. Um, Paul is what keeps me here because, like, I like John. John's a great guy. I think he has a lot of interesting things to say, but, like, I've always been more interested in people. I'm not really interested in the ideas in and of themselves, and John is kind of an ideas guy. He's not
mhm.
cultivating a
I
lot of
agree.
relationships with people. I don't know John. Like, I met him once. He knew who I was, which surprised the hell out of me, and
So
he's a
so
very nice guy, but, like, I don't care. Peugeot stuff, I don't really care. I don't know Peugeot. I know Paul.
mhm. But like I think I touched on something important, right?
Yeah.
Because like Paul doesn't want to lead, you don't want to lead. Why
They
why
don't
don't
wanna
you why
they
don't
don't
you
wanna
want to
lead in a
lead?
structured hyper-structured way.
No, no.
They wanna lead by example.
Yeah, but you don't want to lead, right? Because leading means to make decisions, needs to set the boundaries, right? Like you set a container, like you plant the standard, and then within the boundaries you can cooperate, and then we build there, right? Like you have to build, and build is a set of constraints which gives new affordances, right? So and like I think you and Paul are just realizing like that's not your role, and I think that's correct, and I don't think it's my role either, because like I don't want to impose my things because like people won't listen to me, like I like like so that's already not working, right? So like I shouldn't lead either, but I think this recognition is also the recognition that you're wrong. And like I realize that I shouldn't do the 3-year-old thing, right? And to go back to the 3-year-old, like I don't know, right? Like I agree with you should exemplify things to 3-year-olds, and you should not propositionalize and all of that. But I don't think you can do the magic trick, right? Like I don't think this exemplification stuff is working the way that people pretend it does. Like I don't say it shouldn't happen, right? Like it definitely should happen, like it has to happen, but it's not a sword, right? Like it's not a tool. Like you can't wield it. Like exemplification is not wieldable.
Yeah, I don't know. So this is, well, if we have another conversation, that's probably where I'd like to go because I do appreciate the challenge. There's probably some merit to it. Um, but the direction I see it going is the balance of masculine and feminine, freedom and constraint. What is the proper role of a healthy, not malevolent, masculine spiritual impulse? Like what kind of constraints are good and how? I mean, I'm an anarchist, man. I tend to be pretty opposed to structure.
Mhm.
At least a certain kind of structure. I don't know. It would be an interesting uh
Well, it's more
future
more
navigation.
interesting to see what the value is that
Yes.
is moving you there, right? Because like I had this realization, and I was like, I was shooting into a defense, right? Like someone said something, and I just jumped out to defend it. I was like, do I want to defend this?
Hmm.
Like is that a good thing? And I was like, what the heck is moving me
Yeah.
to defend this? Like why can't it defend itself? Like why can't it speak for itself? Like why do I need to white knight this cause?
Yeah.
And I was like, holy cow! Like there's a bunch of stuff
Yeah.
in me that I think is good, right? Because like defending something is good, that might not be, right? Like it might actually be whatever trauma or is like compelling me to
Yeah.
keep some reality instantiated that I should get rid of, like that should die.
Yeah. Perhaps.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's maybe viewers, please. That's your reflection exercise for today. Like, what are you defending, and why are you defending that? So
Yeah. Comment. I'd love comments. Don't just
yes,
watch. Don't just leave some comment and then not watch it, punks.
yeah, and participate. Maybe we'll continue this in a live stream format so that we can integrate the audience some more. Just yeah, like let us know if you want more of this, if you want a specific direction of the conversation, because I think it was a fruitful exploration, Luke.
I do too. I enjoyed it actually, and so it would be great to continue it. We'll see. My kids are
Cool.
gone this week, so it makes it easier.
Well, everybody, thanks for watching, and thanks for being my guest, Luke.
Yeah. Thanks, Mama. See you later, buddy.